This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآل محمد. Last week we spoke about the four faculties of the human soul, for those of you who are present, I think everyone. And we segmented the faculties or the powers of the human soul into four. The first one of them being what we call the power of intellect, or what is known as al-quwwat al-aqliyya, the aql. The intellect is that power, that mechanism within this immaterial soul, according to Islamic tradition, that has the ability to know, that has the ability to perceive, that has the ability to reflect and contemplate. But more than that, going back to the first point, the ability to be receptive toward the teachings and the commandments and the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His divinely appointed messengers via, of course, this tool. The second faculty or the second power of the soul that we had spoken about was the power of desire, or what is known as shahwiyya. Doesn't matter the order, as long as, of course, we know that the intellect is the most important one. The other three kind of follow suit, and we'll talk about that today, inshallah. The second, of course, is what we said is human desire. Desire for food, desire for sex, desire for power, desire for drink. The bodily desires, the material desires that this human being seeks. Someone says, how can the human being have a material aspect to its desire when it's an immaterial object in and of itself? It's not such that the soul in itself is something physical that attracts the physical, because we defined in day one from our conversations around exactly what is the soul. We said that the soul is something that is metaphysical, meaning it's not something that you can touch, not something you can smell, it's not something that you can feel, so on and so forth. But rather, it gives off the impression that the body is the most important tool of the human being, right? We know that the human being, we have a physical, we have a spiritual, we have a mental / intellectual, and caring for our physical health is just as important as caring for our spiritual health and so on. The power of desire, of physical desire, gives off the impression to the soul that the body is that which needs to be catered to. Make sense? So it gives off the impression that I need food. It gives off the impression that I need power. It gives off the impression that I need wealth. And that all of these things are going to make me happy. This is normal. Every single human being experiences this at numerous junctures and at times, or maybe for most people they experience it only in their life, this particular power, overcoming the power of intellect and the ability again to be perceptive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For most people, the biggest reason why they sin, why they transgress God's boundaries, is because of their attachment or their attraction to this world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, He mentions within the Qur'an that He fashions within the human being this power that can be, of course, channeled in the right way. And we mentioned exactly what are those sort of virtues: procreation, family, wealth, so you can do good with it, so on and so forth. Good. The third power that we had mentioned is what it, excuse me, is what is known as al-quwwat al-ghadabiyya, the power of anger. The power of anger. Every human being experiences anger as a natural emotion, to when we get tired, to when we get hungry, to when we get frustrated, to when we see oppression or injustice, when someone takes away our rights. The way that we respond to that which we are witnessing can either be a virtue or a vice. We can either utilize this power for good or for bad, like every other. And what was the fourth one? Anyone remember? Al-quwwat al-wahmiyya, which means, is with regards to? Anyone remember?
Imagination.
The power of imagination. Very good. the imaginative power, that ability to be curious, but at the same time allow for us to lead our curiosity or procrastinate or a whole host of other things. You can set yourself really lofty goals to doing things that are very meaningful, and then work toward achieving those goals as something positive or a virtue that comes and stems out of this power of imagination. But on the flip side, you can also utilize it again to take you away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't take so much time today. I mentioned to you that we were initially not going to be having this lesson today or this discussion today because of another program, because conflict. Yes?
Last time you defined the intellect as the ability to perceive divine revelation, right? So we had the example of the Qur'an, but like, are there any other examples?
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that today, actually. Yeah. So today, inshallah, what we're going to be doing, very briefly, is we're going to dive into a lengthy report, a lengthy hadith, as narrated by the seventh Shi'i Imam Musa ibn Jaffer al-Kadhim, as he narrates to his companion, a man by the name of Hisham ibn Hakam, whereby he defines what the intellect is and how we are able to allow for the intellect to truly overpower or lead all of the other faculties, all of the other powers, because that's the goal at the end of the day, right? Again, when we talk about desire in and of itself, physical, materialistic desire, essentially is not bad. Anger, in its essence, is not bad. It might be connotated with negative things, but it is not bad in and of itself. What is bad is channeling it in a direction that goes against the divine revelation, going against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed, or in other words, going against the intellect. So it's super important for us to take a look and figure out and reflect and contemplate and think about ways that we can facilitate for this intellect to be the leading force in guiding us to where we need to go. So let's take a look at this tradition. Again, it's narrated by Imam Musa ibn Jaffer al-Kadhim, as he narrates to his companion, a man by the name of Hisham ibn Hakim. He states, as part of, again, very lengthy, we'll just take a look at a couple of lines, and this will sort of help us to answer your question. He states, Ya Hisham, إن الله عز وجل أكمل للناس الحجج بالعقول وأفضى إليهم بالبيان ودلهم على ربوبيته بالأدلة فقال وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار إلى قوله لآيات لقوم يعقلون. He tells him, he says, oh Hisham, listen to what it is that I got to tell you. Then he said, surely God has completed and perfected within the human being this intellect. And he has given them, virtually in summary, and he has given them, meaning the human being, the ability to know God and to perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via God's signs. What are God's signs? He continues. فَقَالْ وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Then he quotes a verse of the Holy Qur'an, until he states these lines from this verse. إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. That surely God has created the heavens and the earth, and he has interchanged the night with the day and the day with the night, meaning that days pass by, the sun sets, the sun rises. إِلَى قَوْلِهِ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. Until God says that surely these signs are signs for the people of intellect. What is God trying to say? And what is Imam Musa al-Kadhim trying to advise this companion, the student of his? He's telling him that the most clear, definitive way to work this intellect is to reflect upon God's signs. What are God's signs? God's signs is literally what he's saying. The creation of the heavens and the earth, the sun setting, the sun rising, the moon in the sky, and then God concludes that these are ayat liqawmin ya'qilun, for the people who utilize their intellect. Meaning that people who don't look up at those clouds that are really beautiful and the little bit of purple that you see in the sky, if you don't think about that, you don't see it, you neglect it day by day, then what are you except for someone who doesn't utilize their intellect? He continues. And you'll see this as a common theme. Yeah, Hisham, again. Oh, Hisham, listen to what I gotta say. قد جعل الله عز وجل ذلك دليلا على معرفته بأن لهم مدبرا فقال وسخر لكم الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر والنجوم مسخرات بأمره إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يعقلون. He states, oh Hisham, surely God, again, He has made all of this as a pathway to His knowledge, to knowing Him. If you want to know God, then look up at the sky. Look up at the sun. Look up and see the creation and His signs present around you. For surely He says that He is the organizer of all of this. He's the one who takes care of it. He's the one who facilitates it. And then he quotes the verse of the whole of Qur'an when he states, فَقَالْ, meaning Allah said, وَسَخَّرَ لَكُمُ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارِ وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ وَالنُّجُومُ مُسَخَّرَاتٌ بِأَمْرِهِ, that God has placed in the horizons the sun and the moon and the stars. And they're all present and they all follow in accordance with His command. And then how does He conclude? إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. Again, God concludes this verse by stating, surely these are signs for people who utilize their intellect, for the people of intellect. وَقَالْ حَمِيمٌ وَالْكِتَابِ الْمُبِينِ إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. And then he continues, and he says, and God also continues, and He states in these ayat of the whole Qur'an, that surely we have made the Qur'an into the Arabic language so that you think, so that you reflect. So in addition to reflecting and contemplating upon the signs, also reflect on the Qur'an. To answer your question, we mentioned the Qur'an last time. What are some of the others? وَقَالْ, and he continues, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ يُرِيكُمُ الْبَرْقَ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا وَيُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً. That when you see lightning and thunder in the sky, some people will become fearful, but some people will become excited. Why would some people become excited? What would be the benefit? Think about it. Especially, maybe not in this part of the world, but when there's thunder and there's lightning, that means there's rain. When there's rain, there's growth of crops, and there's drought particularly. So he states, God says in this verse, he's quoting another verse of the Quran, in which he states, he says, look up, when there's thunder and lightning in the sky, from my servants, you see some people who are excited and some people who are scared. Those who get happy, they're looking for something. Those who get scared because of the power and the majesty of God that's being put on display. وَيُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَيُحْيِي بِهِ الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لَقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. Again, he continues. And he states that from this, God allows for rain to fall down from the skies, quoting a verse of the whole Quran, and He brings the dead back. He brings life from the dead, meaning from the plants and from the crops. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لَقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. He continues and he states, and surely, again, this is a sign for the people of intellect. Ya Hisham. He continues. Imam Muslim Kazim, the seventh Imam, he continues. He says, Ya Hisham, O Hisham, ثُمَّ وَأَضَى أَهْلَ الْعَقْلِ وَرَغَّبَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ فقال وما الحياة الدنيا إلا لعب ولهو ولدار الآخرة خير للذين يتقون أفلا تعقلون. What are some of the other things that stimulate this intellect? He states, O Hisham, and then God continued, meaning in the Quran. He continued and he advised the people of intellect, the people who are able to be receptive, about the benefits and about the beauty and the fact that they should have desire in the world beyond this one. And what did he state? He said, meaning God said, وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ. And what is this world except for play and amusement? What is this world? Except something transient. وَلَدَارُ الْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. And surely the world beyond this one, the next world, after we pass away, we transverse from the dunya to the akhirah, is better for those who have taqwa, those who have God consciousness. And then how does God conclude the verse? Anyone can guess? Based on how we've been going?
Surely this is a sign for the people of the world.
Close, yes. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Why don't you think? Why don't you utilize your intellect? أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. So what does he say again? So in the beginning, he starts talking about his signs. Then he concludes all the, when guy talks about the sun and the oceans and the moon and the stars, he concludes by saying, surely these are signs for the people of intellect. And then in this verse, he talks about how this world is play and amusement. And then he states, but only those, or do you not think, or are you not the person of intellect? Don't you utilize your mind a little bit? He continues. وَقَالَ, meaning God said. Imam al-Kadhim is telling his companion, his student, Hisham, his disciple. Hisham, وَقَالَ وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَمَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَزِينَتُهَا وَمَا إِنَّ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. He states that God continues, and he states that everything that you've been given in this world, in this dunya, is good. Nothing wrong with it. It's pleasurable. You can have fun. It's all good. فَمَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَزِينَتُهَا. And this is even a sort of an adornment of this world. God says in the Qur'an numerous times that your wealth, that your children, your family, all these things that are pleasurable to you in this world, you should enjoy it. No worries. As long as you know two things. Number one, that it's transient. And number two, that the world beyond this one and all of those blessings are multiplied a millionfold, tenfold in the next world. That they're better. So why wouldn't you want something that's better? Like, why is it okay? Why would you be okay with being complacent when you can do better? Right? You have two jobs in front of you, two job opportunities, or two colleges in front of you. Or you have the iPhone 12 and the iPhone, one just came out? 14? Huh? 13? And the iPhone 13. And literally they will say, I'm not going to ask you for any sort of financial, I don't need any payment. Literally, you give me this one and I'll give you a new one. No one's going to say, yeah, I want this one. It's so much nicer. It brings me back so many good memories. They're going to say, no, the camera is better. The processor is better. It's faster. You have two jobs in front of you. One of them, they both have the same exact job description. They're both in the same location. One of them pays you double the salary. Why would anyone say, oh, I'm comfortable here? In Islamic theology, there's a principle when it comes to studying God, or speaking polemically with those who don't believe in God. A principle that's often employed, probably very similar to the fine-tuning argument you said. It's called qa'idatun nidam. Like look at the organization of the world, right? If one thing was a little bit different, if the temperature was 1 degree warmer in the world or 1 degree colder, there would be so much dysfunction taking place, kind of in society. But this sort of perfection virtue that we're in is amongst the proofs. And I don't know. It's not my particular expertise, but from the literature and from what is available out there, I'm sure that in a personality like Stephen Hawking is probably much more intelligent than I, right? In terms of debating the sort of lack of the presence of God, in the first place. But I would say that, and again, I don't know the answers to the questions, but I would say that in understanding what the religious tradition says about the intellect, about the aql, and about its receptivity, stems from first and foremostly this belief or conviction that we have that the human being is created with what is known as the fitrah, which again is more important that we have conviction than trying to figure out how to explain it to your professor, right, who may not believe in God, for instance. And I think that itself is a completely different discussion. But to understand that the human being has been given something known as the fitrah. In other words, the ability to know God, right? The fact that we are born with this understanding that there is a higher power that you need to be submissive to, right? Which is why we're taught, to not lie to our children. Because when we're young, we assume that our ultimate sustainer is our parents, And so when we want something, we cry. When we want to get cleaned, when we want to eat, when we want to drink, when we want to sleep, because you don't know those skills. Because we assume that our mother, our father, our caretaker is going to be caretaking for us when we need those things. that in itself is a demonstration that we, from the moment that we are born, are innately fashioned towards some sense of hierarchy, right? This is how like most Muslim theologians, in other words, would explain that though. But I think going back to like the question in and of itself, it's probably part of a longer discussion. But I think the fine-tuning argument is something I'll look into and kind of see how it parallels with kind of like what a lot of Islamic theologians, Muslim theologians have to say about that as well. Let's go through maybe two more because it's a very lengthy report. It continues. Ya Hisham. Again, Imam Musa al-Kadhim is telling his confidant, his student, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, Ya Hisham, ثم خوف الذين لا يعقلون أبابه فقال عز وجل ثم دمرنا الآخرين وإنكم لتمرون عليهم مسبحين وبالليل أفلا تعقلون. He says, then after God, he advises the believers, the people of intellect, about the reward of the world beyond this one, telling them it's better. Why would you want something so simple when you can get something better? Then he speaks to those who don't have intellect, who don't utilize their aql. And he reminds them, or he tells them about their punishment. And he gives an example whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes the communities of the past prophets, ثُمَّ دَمَّرْنَا الْآخَرِينَ, and then he destroyed many a civilization before, as he mentions in the whole Qur'an. And then he concludes that verse by telling them that, in the morning, everything will be okay, and at night, that's it. You lost everything. Life is passing. Life is transient. It passes by in the blink of an eye. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Do you again not utilize this intellect? Ya Hisham. ثُمَّ بَيَّنَ أَنَّ الْأَقْلَ مع العلم فقال وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس وما يعقلها إلا العالمون. Then he continues, meaning that God continues, and he tells us about the importance of utilizing the intellect with knowledge. Now this is important, and we'll conclude maybe over here, inshallah. We want to again differentiate between kind of the Western perception of what is the intellect and what is the Islamic definition of it. And I think like to call it the intellect probably immediately confuses us because maybe you've taken some class in philosophy 101 or something. Obviously you've taken 301 and 401 and 501 and whatever. But we're so ingrained with seeing the intellect as again sort of this, rational, logical tool that we have been given, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the whole Qur'an defines it as something very different. And there's a differentiation within this verse of the Qur'an with knowledge, meaning the intellect is a tool that has the ability to know God. You have to apply knowledge upon it in order to produce a fruit. So he states numerous times within the Qur'an that we have given you these verses of the Qur'an so you can reflect upon them. But how do you reflect if you don't know? How can you look up at the sun and the moon and the stars and see all of the signs if you're not also someone who studies it? I'll give you an example. And I'll conclude with this, inshallah. Anyone can take benefit from looking at the changing of the day into night, as at least I did while I was talking in the last half an hour. Your backs are against the window, but every single one of you have seen the sunset before, all right? Yeah. Every one of you hopefully has seen the sunrise before. It's beautiful. And for most people, we take those images for granted. The way that I see it is as just a beautiful sight. How about someone who is, a student of, what are people who study the sky? Let me give you a better example. The example that I often give is if you're walking in the park and you see a nice, attractive flower. You see a beautiful flower, it looks nice. The way that I would see it is like, man, that's really beautiful. SubhanAllah, like Allah creates really beautiful plants, really creates beautiful flowers. But someone who has a higher level of knowledge of botany, they can appreciate, right, that much more than I. Or someone who's a gardener can appreciate what goes into allowing for that flower to look so beautiful a lot more than someone like me who just gazes upon it, because they're more knowledgeable in that field than I. Right? Now imagine there's a professor of botany at NYU, I'm sure there is, who comes and they walk by, they're going to appreciate that site more than the gardener, more than the student, because again, they have a deeper knowledge of everything that comes into play in allowing for that to appear in front of them. You follow what I'm saying? And if they have that sense of belief and conviction, their knowledge and their conviction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also increase. You follow what I'm saying? How many of you have a child or like some kids in your family, like young kids? It's pretty incredible if you have like young children in your family, and I'm saying it probably because I have two kids who are fairly young, to see their development over the course of, their early years. Or even prior to that, to witness something like childbirth itself is really incredible, right? There's a human being who didn't exist in the world yesterday, and now they're alive. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's the most amazing thing that you can ever experience, the most amazing thing you can ever see. For the doctor who gives birth to that child, if they don't believe in a God, they're just seeing it as an act of science, an act of biology, right? Another check in the box, right? Of something that they did for the day. And maybe they do it multiple times a day, I don't know, right? But for someone who sees life taking place in front of their eyes with a sense of God consciousness, in addition to their skill and their knowledge in medicine and everything that needs to go right in order for the child to be born, because a lot of things need to go right for a child to be born. There's a lot of risks associated with the event of childbirth, right? Imagine the level of knowledge that doctor who's a God-conscious believer, she or he, when they're witnessing that moment and they're giving birth to that child, again, what sort of deep knowledge and conviction that they have. And this goes with any field and in any practice and in any science. The idea is that the intellect gives us the ability to know, to believe. With knowledge, coupled with knowledge, we have the ability to take this level of our intellect and our understanding and our sort of certainty in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to this incredible height. And that's what we're working toward. So when you see something that reminds you of God, you want to dive into it a little bit deeper to know exactly or to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the midst of it. So you look up at the sun and the moon and the oceans and the rivers. No harm in figuring out, what needs to go right or why are all these purple and beautiful colors in the sky? Again, we can all appreciate it if we have no knowledge. But the moment that we increase, there's more appreciation. In this verse of the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the stories that are mentioned within the book. The stories of previous prophets. Someone can get a good glimpse of the story of Yusuf or the story of Yaqub or the story of Nuh or Musa or Isa or any of the previous prophets and appreciate, some aspect of the lesson that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing us within the Holy Quran. But if you go and you dive a little bit deeper to understand the nuance and the details of those stories as mentioned within the hadith or something like that, again, your appreciation for it develops and becomes even more beautiful. And you're able to see God with even more clarity and even more depth. You follow what I'm saying? So these are all some tools that we can employ in terms of working toward perfecting, purifying, cultivating this intellect of ours, the aql. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.